Welcome back once again. All right, in the last segment of this course, we're going to talk about social learning theory. Remember, I talked about at the very beginning, first segment, we talked about these three assumptions about people. You're born good, you're born, so you're born good, something comes along to make you bad, you're born bad, society controls you to make you good. And then there's that middle ground of neutral or tabula rasa, that we're all born a blank slate, where our behavior is the result of our collective experiences. This middle proposition, this tabula rasa proposition. Tabula rasa, by the way, is Latin for blank slate, for those of you who are wondering. It's also the name of a really kind of semi horrible video game. Rabbit. Social learning theories follow this tabula rasa perspective, that people are born neutral and that they are the result of the collective experiences. Social learning theory begins, for our purposes, when you take criminal theory, we'll go a little further back in time, but for our purposes in this class, we'll start with a theorist named Edwin Sutherland. Don't confuse Edwin Sutherland with Donald Sutherland, or certainly not Kiefer Sutherland. Donald Sutherland is a delightful actor. Kiefer Sutherland was an okay actor. Edwin Sutherland was a sociologist. I bring that joke up because in grad school on an exam, actually my comprehensive exam, I was answering a question about social learning theory, and every time I talked about Sutherland in my 10-page answer to the exam question, I referred to him as Donald Sutherland. My professors thought it was hilarious. I was horribly embarrassed. At least I didn't call him Kiefer. So we talk about Edwin Sutherland and a theory called differential association. Now there are 9 propositions to Edwin Sutherland's theory, and then when you take the theory course, you have to memorize all 9 of them. For our class, I'm just going to give you 3. I'm going to boil it down to the 3 most important. The first one is that criminal behavior is learned in interaction with other persons in a process of communication. In other words, we learn, and not just criminal behavior, we learn every one of our behaviors. We learn all of our attitudes and beliefs about behavior. In other words, we learn for each individual behavior we might commit or engage in, we learn whether or not we learn about whether or not it is good or bad based on our communication and our interaction with the people in our lives. And this principal part of learning, the second proposition I want you to know, is that the principal part of learning, the primary part of this learning, is occurring within intimate personal groups. And I don't mean intimate by, you're intimate. We're talking about the people that are closest to us. In other words, the people we have the closest relationship to are the people we're going to do the most learning from. And so when we're little kids, that's our parents. And then when we grow up, it's our peers. And then when we, grow up even further, it's our peer group, it's our friends. And eventually, strangely enough, we come back around to that becoming our parents again when we get older and wiser and realize that our parents did know better than we did. I know most of you are probably not at that stage yet where you realize that your parents really didn't know what they were talking about, but I promise you, most of you will get there. Third proposition we know is that when people learn, they learn that criminal behavior, when the people learn that criminal behavior is acceptable, they become criminal. And that we learn individually, we learn individually. I mean, we learn about individual crime. So, we learn about theft, and we go, okay, is theft good or bad? And we learn from our intimate personal groups whether stealing is good or bad. And if we learn that it's good, then we do those things because we don't think anything about it. And if we think it's bad, we won't do those things. And that's your dime store explanation of Sutherland. Again, when you take theory, you'll get the whole 9. But that's not, we'll skip it for this class. And I explained so the only reason I explained Sutherland in an intro class is so I can explain social learning theory developed by Burgess and Akers. Same Burgess we talked about in social disorganization, by the way. So these guys state, and here is the key statement that you would want to know, taking purposes, about Burgess and Akers' social learning theory, and that's that deviant behavior may be expected to the extent that it is differentially reinforced over alternative behavior and is defined or justified by the individual. Let me say it one more time. That's just on a PowerPoint or anything. Deviant behavior may be expected. So it's not guaranteed, just may be expected to the extent, in other words, to the extent is a way of saying if it is or how much it is differentially reinforced over alternative behavior and is defined or justified by the individual. There are four key concepts to this theory that help you understand this statement. The first of those four key concepts is differential association, i.e. Sutherland's theory. In other words, these two guys went, okay, everything Sutherland said, that's the first concept of our theory. That's why I had to explain Sutherland. Differential association is the process by which people are exposed to favorable or unfavorable definitions about behaviors. In this case, talking about criminal behaviors. The quality of the association, in other words, the relationship between the people of the person that we have with the person that we learn from, does impact how much we fall into these beliefs or how much we accept these beliefs. You know, if I have a really good relationship with my parents and they tell me stealing is bad, I'm more likely to believe stealing is bad than if I have a really crappy relationship with my parents. They tell me stealing is bad. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Second concept is the definition. Right? I just use that phrase definition a whole bunch. Definitions are our attitudes and beliefs. So definitions are attitudes and beliefs that we attach to our own behavior or the behaviors we consider doing or the behaviors we see other people doing. That dude stole. Stealing is bad. That's my definition of stealing. Stealing is bad. Because remember, in this context, definition means our attitude and belief. We will have for every kind of behavior. Again, since this is criminal justice class, we'll put this in a criminal justice context. For every type of crime, we have an individual definition for each one. My favorite story to tell to kind of illustrate this came from my wife, who used to be a correctional officer. And there's a day, I think this is when she was at the Wynn unit in Huntsville, and she was working the infirmary. And the handset to the telephone comes up missing. And when you're in prison, there are all sorts of fun things you can make. If you can take this handset apart and get at the magnets in here, there's all sorts of fun things you can do with those things. So it's a highly valued piece of contraband, a very useful piece of contraband if you're a prison inmate. And this thing comes up missing in the infirmary. And so, my wife is going about searching all the inmates as they come in and out, as they come out of the infirmary, so we can find the one that has the handset to the phone stuck down his pants. And, as each inmate comes to leave the infirmary, she's like, come out of them. What she's saying is strip. And, she's doing this, and inmates are coming through. And an inmate walks up to her and she says, come out of them. The inmate looks at his, oh, Miss Day, I'm a drug dealer, not a thief. This particular inmate had two very different definitions of two different types of crimes. He had a favorable definition towards selling drugs. That's what he was in prison for, selling drugs. On the other hand, he had an unfavorable definition towards stealing. He thought stealing was wrong. And we all have things like that when it comes to the criminal code. We got stuff that we're like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And we got other stuff we're like, yeah, that's wrong. Most people I know, they look at the criminal code, the traffic code related to speeding. They're like, yeah, they're got a favorable definition. They're like, I drive as fast as the cops will let me. That's why the average speed around, the loop in Houston is 80. And that's probably a low estimate. So we got definition. Third concept, differential reinforcement. This refers to the balance between rewards and punishment. So Burgess and Akers here, they reach all the way back in time to deterrence theory. They also reach back in time to some psych theory about reinforcement. This whole idea that if you put the little rat in the maze And if they do the maze right, you reward them with a little cheese. And if they don't do the maze right, they get the little shocky buzz. Same thing works with humans. You know, if they do a thing and they're rewarded for the thing that they do, then they're more likely to repeat it. You know, if I go out and burglarize cars and I make a lot of money doing it and I don't get caught, I'm more likely to repeat burglarizing cars. If the first time I go out burglarizing cars, I get caught, I end up in jail, lose my job, lose my wife, you know, I got heaps of consequences, I'm less likely to repeat it. Deterrence. And so differential reinforcement is this balance that if the reward for behavior outweighs the consequence, I'm going to repeat the behavior. If the consequence outweighs the reward, I'm less likely to repeat the behavior. And that balance, that differential reinforcement, that balance between rewards and punishment is also going to alter my definition. For instance, let's say I got a favorable definition towards robbery, burglarizing houses. And one night, and you know, I've got a favorable definition, and then I go out to burglarize a house, and I walk in the house, and I get hit with a shotgun. You know, I spend 6 months in the hospital. You know, I spend weeks in the hospital as doctors are pulling little shotgun pellets out of my abdomen, and then to add insult to injury, I go to jail for, you know, a year, or I spent a couple of years in prison. Now I'm less likely to be, when I finish my consequence, my punishment, and get out of jail or prison, I am far less likely to burglarize houses. And my definition, before I went to prison, my definition was burglary, good. Now my definition of burglary is burglary, bad. Because bad things happen to you when burglaries go wrong. And so instead of being a burglar, I'm going to sell drugs. The fourth concept of differential reinforcement is imitation. And that's the copying of behavior, because one of the things Sutherland really left out of his theory was the idea that we don't actually have to experience things ourselves to learn from them. That sometimes we can see someone else do a behavior and gain a definition or change a definition based on what we see. You know, let's say I'm the younger brother in a family and my older brother's a gangbanger. And I see my brother, he's always got money, he's always got Jordans, he's always got, you know, he's got the latest cell phone, he's got, you know, girls hanging him all the time. All I see of my brother is that he gets stuff. He's always rewarded for this bad gangbanging stuff he does. Guess what? My odds of becoming a gang member just increased. And my definition of being a gang member is going to go positive. On the other hand, if I watch my brother get killed in a drive-by, or I watch him go to jail or prison, and I see all sorts of bad things happen to him because he's a gangbanger, my odds of becoming joining the gang, becoming a gangbanger myself, go down. All right, that's differential reinforcement. Last type of theory I want to talk about for this unit in this class is social reaction theory. And I leave social reaction theory for last because it is the strain of all the theories. It's the weirdest one. Because the only theory that puts the blame for criminal behavior on the criminal justice system rather than the individual or the environment the individual grows up in. Social reaction theories are popularly known as labeling theory. And they're based on a sociological concept known as symbolic interactionism. And the idea is, and this will hurt your head, and it hurts my head to explain it. And when you get to 3380, I'll explain it in a little more detail, but we'll try the basic explanation. Symbolic interaction theorists believe that our behavior, in other words, what we do, is based on our self-concept. In other words, what we do is based on who we believe ourselves to be. And that who we believe ourselves to be is based on how we think others view us. Do you get that? In other words, we interact with people every day. And based on our interaction with people, we get this perception, this idea of what people think of us, whether we're a good person, we're a bad person, we're a class clown, we're an idiot, you know, we're a dumb jock, we're nerd, whatever it is, we get this idea. We get this idea of what people think about us. And because of the social nature, we are social creatures because of the social nature of our nature. We tend to base our own self-concept according to symbolic interactions. You're all probably thinking, that's BS, I don't do that. Yeah, you probably do, and you just don't know it. The idea is we base who we believe ourselves to be based on what we think or what we perceive others think of us. In other words, if people think I'm funny, then I think I'm funny. If I think other people think I'm funny, then I think I'm funny. You understand why it hurts my head to explain this? Then I take my self-concept, who I believe myself to be, and that influences my behavior. John Braithwaite put this at one point in concept of potheads, people use pot. That you get the person, maybe experiments with marijuana, but then if the people around him, if he thinks the other people around him think of him as a stoner, then that becomes part of his master status or a self-concept. He starts to believe, oh, dude, I'm a stoner. And then once the self-concept is, dude, I'm a stoner, and then he begins acting as subconsciously he believes a stoner ought to act. That's why he dresses like stoners, why he talks like this, man. All that behavior comes down to who we believe ourselves to be, which is based on who we think other people perceive us. And then we act in accordance with how we think we're expected to behave, based on other people's opinion of ourselves. It sounds ridiculous. Think about it long enough, you're like, oh, damn, I do that. It is a sociological theory with quite a bit of merit. All right, so we move from that to labeling theorists. And what labeling theorists say is that how people behave is less important than how society reacts to it. In other words, how does society label the behavior? In other words, if I do a thing and people ignore it, that behavior probably won't be repeated or it won't impact my self-concept. If I do a thing and people recognize that my behavior is good and they reinforce that belief, and from my interactions with other people, they think because of my behavior, I'm a good person, then I get the idea that I'm a good person. And I start to believe that becomes part of my self-concept. Again, who I believe myself to be, I'm a good person. And then my behavior, therefore, reflects that belief. In other words, I act how I think a good person is expected to act in society. On the other hand, if the thing that I do, society's reaction to it leads me to believe that I'm a bad person. They treat me like a bad person. They label me as a bad person. They call me an offender, an inmate, a criminal, thug, gangbanger. They put these negative labels on me. Eventually, if these labels are applied to me often enough, particularly by significant people, I will eventually begin to believe that to be true. That will become part of my self-concept. I will start to believe that I'm a bad person, that the label will become part of who I believe myself to be. And at that point, my behavior begins to match what I believe is expected of me. And so if someone calls me a thief long enough, and enough people call me a thief long enough, and that label comes from significant formal sources, I will eventually, that will become my self-concept. I'm a thief. That's who I am. I can't help it. And then I will begin to act as what I believe people expect me to act. It'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I will actually be a thief. And so the idea behind labeling theory is that the words we use and how we apply those words to individuals will ultimately impact their self-concept, which will then impact their behavior. This theory is the reason why we use a whole different vocabulary when we deal with juvenile offenders. We don't call them criminals, we call them delinquents. Juveniles are technically not arrested, they're taken into custody. They're not convicted. They're adjudicated. We don't call them inmates, even when they're in our correctional facilities. We don't call them inmates, we call them students. And the whole reason for this, all these word games that we play with juveniles, is to avoid negative label, because we want to avoid changing their self-concept. When really the whole point when we locked them up in a facility that looks like a prison, we've already done it. It's an interesting theory, but it is grounded in the idea that the way we treat criminals has a direct impact on their future behavior. That when a person commits an unwanted behavior, when they commit a crime, punishment is appropriate. Labeling theorists don't deny that, but the way we apply that punishment and the way we treat people during and after the punishment has an impact on the individual's self-concept. When the self-concept becomes, when the person firmly believes that they are a criminal, that becomes part of their master status, part of their concept, that they are going to be a criminal. That presents a lot of trouble for rehabilitation folks like me, because now I've got to take all that damage that was done to the individual self-concept, and I've got to convince them that they're not a druggie, a stoner, a criminal, a gangbanger, a delinquent, a thug. I've got to change the self-concept. And in practice, it is a lot easier to give someone a negative self-concept than it is to give them a positive self-concept. Consider that in the words that you use with other people and the way you treat folks, that you may be unintentionally having a much more impact on an individual than you mean to. And that ends lecture for Unit 5. Be sure to remember to study this week, as the end of this unit does include the first exam of the semester.